Now here I'm going to only pass in my value for x, since I've already given a default value for argument y and z. So my function only needs one argument, that is x. So let's say I want x to be 20. If I run this, you see the result here. So 20 plus 15 plus 24 is 59. Now you can also use the asterisk args parameter or args. So this allows you to define as many arguments as you want. So I'll say addition equal to lambda, then I'll say asterisk args. So this will allow us to pass in as many arguments as you want, and I want to find the sum of args. So I'm using the inbuilt sum function in Python. Now I'll say print my variable name, that is addition, and let's say I want to find the sum for 4 values or 4 arguments, let's say 20, 2, 40 and let's say 50. If I run it, so the value is 112. So 20 plus 2 plus 40 plus 50 is 112. Cool. Now lambda functions are also used with higher order functions which take one or more functions as arguments or return one or more functions. Let me show you. So I'll define a variable called higher underscore ord underscore fun, which stands for function and ord stands for order. So I'll declare my lambda function. Suppose the parameters are x, and then I have a function, and then followed by a colon I have my expression as x plus function of x. Now I'll say higher underscore ord underscore fun, and I'll pass in my 2 arguments. Let's say my x is 20, and for this function I'll have a lambda function defined. I'll say lambda x colon x multiplied by x. Now let me just run this and I'll show you the result. Okay, so what it did was it added my value of x, that is 20, with function of x or fun of x. What is fun of x? Fun of x is x multiplied by x. So 20 multiplied by 20 is 400. So this becomes 400 plus x, which is 400 plus 20, hence the result is 420. So this is known as a higher order function. Now let me show you another example. Let's say I want to display odd or even by taking the value of x. I'll say lambda x colon. Here I am going to pass in my expression. If x mod 2, give a space here, I'll say and odd or even. Now I'll give my argument value, let's say 30. The result is even because 30 is divisible by 2. I'll just change this to, let's say, 15. If I run it, the answer is odd because 15 is not divisible by 2. Let's say I have 150, the answer is even. Now moving ahead, so let's write a lambda function that checks if a string is a substring of the given string. So I'll create a variable called sub underscore string. Now I'll assign this variable with a lambda function. I'll say lambda, my argument, let's say string. I'll give the colon and pass in my expression string in. Let's say my string has this message, welcome to Python functions tutorial. Okay, so we are going to check if a string, let's say in, to, welcome, Python, Java, anything, whether it's present inside this string which is welcome to Python functions tutorial. Now let me go to the next line. I'm going to print sub underscore string, and let's say I want to check for my string, let's say Java. If I run it, it gives me false because the word Java is not present inside my string welcome to Python functions tutorial. Suppose I write Python. Now one thing to note here is the P is small and here the P is in capital letter. If I run it, it again gives me false because Python is case sensitive. Now if I make this as capital P, it will result in true. Let's say I want to say, instead of tutorial, let's say I have training. If I run it, it tells me false because this word training is not there in the string welcome to Python functions tutorial. I'll change this to tutorial. You see here I have my result as true. Alright. Now let's see how to use lambda functions using filter function. So we are going to filter a list of numbers using a specific condition. So I'll create a list called num. Let's say it has values 40, 10, 40, then we have 56, 27, let's say 33, 15 and 70. So this is my list. Now I'm going to use my lambda function along with the filter function. So I'll pass in my variable as greater. I'll say list, then I'm going to pass in the filter function, and inside the filter function I'll use the lambda function, and I'll have my argument as num, and my expression, let's say I want to filter only those values which are greater than 30. So I'll say num greater than 30. This is my expression or the condition that we want to check. I'll give a comma and I'll have my next argument as num, and let's go ahead and print the variable greater. If I run this, there you go. You can see here we have all the values from the list or the numbers from the list that are greater than 30. So we have 40, 56, 33 and 70. So 10, 27 and 15 are less than 30, and hence those three values were not printed. Now let's say you want to filter a list of numbers that are divisible by 4. So I'll create another list called list1, and let's say I'll have the same values in the list, so I'll just copy it and I'll paste it here, and I'll create my variable, let's say divide. I'll say divide equal to list1. I'll use the filter function followed by the lambda function. I'll say x colon, then I'll have my expression x mod 4 should be equal to 0. I'll give a comma and pass in my next argument as my list1. Now I'm going to say print divide. Okay, I'll remove the bracket here. There is no need of a bracket here. Cool. And we'll delete here as well. Now let's run it. Okay, there is one error here. This should be list1. Let's run it again. Okay, there is some error. Let's debug it. Okay, so this should be the function list. Cool. There you go. So here you can see we have two numbers 40 and 56 that are divisible by 4. The remaining numbers are not divisible by 4 and hence were not printed. Alright, now let's go ahead and explore how you can use the map function along with the lambda function. So the map function accepts two arguments, a function and a list. It takes that function and applies it to every element of the list and returns the modified list. So we'll create a list called list2. I'll say equal to, and again we are going to have the same values in the list as above. So I'll just copy those values or the numbers and I'll paste it here. Okay, now let's say I want to find the value of a number multiplied by 2. So I'll say, let's say the variable name is double the num or double the number. I'm going to use the list function followed by the map function this time, and then we'll have our lambda function. I'll pass in my argument as x colon followed by the expression, so x multiplied by 2. I'll give a comma and then we'll have the list, that is list2. There's a spelling mistake here, this should be list2. Alright, now I'm going to say print double underscore the underscore num. Make sure there is no space in the variable name. Now if I run it, you can see here we have multiplied every number in the list by 2. So 10 multiplied by 2 is 20, 40 multiplied by 2 is 80, similarly 30 multiplied by 2 is 66, 15 multiplied by 2 is 30, and again we have 70 multiplied by 2 is 140. So this is how you can use map function with lambda functions. Now suppose you want to find the power of a number. Let's say I want to find the power of a number raised to 3. So I'll create a list called list3. Let's say I have values 2, 5, 10, 6, 4, and then let's say we have 12. I'll say cube. So I want to find the value of a number raised to the power 3. So for that I'm going to use the map function followed by the lambda function. I'll pass in my argument x, and then here I am going to use the inbuilt power function in Python. So POW, my argument x, and this x I want to raise it to the power of 3, and then I'll have my next argument, which is list underscore 3 or list3. Okay, now let's print the list. So I'll say list of cube. I'll run it. You can see here, so 2 raised to the power 3 or 2 cube is 8, 5 cube is 125, 10 cube is 1000, 6 cube is 216, 4 cube is 64, and 12 cube is 1728. Now coming to the final section of the demo, where we'll see how to use the reduce function in Python along with the lambda function, and then we'll use a lambda function within a user-defined function. So first let's look at how to use reduce in Python. So reduce applies a rolling calculation to all items in a list. You can use it to calculate the total sum or to multiply all the numbers together. So reduce function is a part of functools module. So to use the reduce function you need to import the functools module first. So I'll say from functools import my function, that is reduce, and then I'll say, let's say I have my list 4 this time. I'll create a list. I'm going to take the same values as above and I'll pass in within a list, and now I want to find the sum of all the numbers that are present inside this list called list 4. So I'll do that using my reduce function followed by the lambda function. So I'll say x comma, and I'll give my expression as y colon x plus y, give a comma and pass in my last argument, which is my list itself, which is list 4. Alright, and then I'll say print sum. Let's run it. There you go. So 2 plus 5 plus 10 plus 6 plus 4 plus 12 is 39. So this is how you can use the reduce function in Python. Suppose you wanted to find the product of all the numbers present inside the list, so you can just use the asterisk instead of the addition operator. Now if I run this, you have the product of all the numbers that were present inside the list, that is list 4. We have 28,800. Now let me show you the final demo, that is using a lambda function in a user-defined function. So first of all, I'll create a user-defined function to calculate the value of a quadratic equation. So for some of you who don't know the formula of quadratic equation, it is ax square plus bx plus c. So we are going to use that formula in our function and find the value using lambda function. So I'll create a user-defined function called quadratic, and it will have 3 arguments, a comma b comma c. I'll say return, and here in the return expression I'm going to pass in my lambda function. I'll say lambda x, which is my argument. I'll say x colon, and then I'll have my equation, which is a x square. So I'm saying a multiplied by x raised to the power 2. So I'm using double asterisk plus b multiplied by x. So this becomes ax square plus bx plus I have my constant, that is c. Now just go to the next line. I'm going to create a variable, let's say f. I'll have my user defined function name quadratic. I'll pass in the values for a, b and c. Let's say a is 2, b is 3 and c is, let's say, 5, and I'll call a of 1. The value of x is 1, the value of a is 2, the value of b is 3, and the value of c is 5. Now let's run it and see the result. So ax square plus bx plus c for a equal to 2, b equal to 3 and c equal to 5, the result is 10. Now let's change it to, let's say I want the value of x as 2. If I run it, you have the equation evaluated and the result is 19. Alright. So what is a class in Python? A class is a virtual entity or a blueprint for creating objects. A class in Python provides a means of bundling data and functionality together. You can think of a class as a school. So here school becomes your class. A school has attributes about the students, classrooms, labs, playgrounds, etc. Hence the school can be called a class, and classrooms, labs, desks, playground, assembly are the attributes or objects of a class. A class comes into existence when it is instantiated or initiated. We can create as many objects as possible in a class. Now in Python, a class is created using the keyword called class followed by the class name. The first string inside the class is called docstring and has a brief description of the class. Below you can see the syntax of creating a class in Python. We have the class keyword followed by the class name. This should be a valid Python name, and then you have a colon. Below that you have the statements that should be present inside the class. Now let's look at an example of a class in Python. So here you can see we have created a class called student, and we have two variables, the student ID and the name of the student. And after that we have created a function using the def keyword. So this is a user defined function and the name of the function is called display. And inside the display function we are giving a parameter called self. So here the self parameter refers to the current class object and accesses the class variables. We can use anything instead of self, but it must be the first parameter of any function which belongs to the class. Now moving ahead, So let's look at what is an object in Python. So an object is also called an instance of a class, and the process of creating this object is called instantiation. Now you need to create an object of the class if you want to use the class attributes in another class or method. Now the procedure to create an object is similar to a function call. So below you can see we have created a object called stu and we have called the class student using parenthesis. So this is how you create a class, and after that we are displaying the message to be printed by calling the class name followed by the function which is present inside the class. So this example will create a new object instance named stu. We can access the attributes of the objects using the object name prefix. Now moving ahead, let's understand the initialization or init method in a Python class. The init method is similar to constructors in C++ and Java. All classes in Python have an init function. It is always executed when the class is being initiated. You can use the init function to assign values to object properties or other operations that are necessary to do when the object has been created. So the init function is called automatically every time the class is being used to create a new object. So here you can see we have used the init method. We have defined using the def keyword. Then we have parameters self, name and age. So we are calling the class using this object called s1, and then we have passed in the values for name and age, that is delay, and his age is 27 years, and after that we are printing the age and the name as well. Alright, now let's get started with our demo on classes and objects in Python on the Jupyter Notebook. So I am on my Jupyter Notebook. Let me first go ahead and rename my notebook to classes and objects in Python. Alright, I'll click on rename. First of all, let me show you how to create a simple class. So I'm creating a new class using the class keyword. So this is the keyword class, and followed by the keyword I have my class name called new class. One thing to note here is the class name should always be a valid Python name. I'll give a colon, and in the next line I'll just say x equal to 50. So this x is a variable which is present inside my class called new class. Now if I run it, I have my new class created. Now if you want to display the value of x, you can just say new class dot x. Now if I run this, you can see here I have my value printed, which is 50. Now we'll see another simple example to create a class and to call that class using an object. So I'll say class, then I'll say new class, let's say 1, give a colon, and I'll create a variable called x equal to 100. So my x is a variable which is present inside new class 1 and holds a value 100. Now I'll give a comment, create object. So to create an object, I'll define a variable called r. Let's say r stands for result, and then I'll say new class 1. So I'm calling my class, and then I'll say print r, which is my new object, dot x. Let's run it. You see here I have my value printed of x, which is 100. So this is how you can create or initiate a class using an object. Now let's see how you can use the self parameter in a class. So I'll go ahead and create a class called student, give a colon, then I'll have some variables or the attributes of a student. Let's say the student ID is 10 and the name is Anderson. Now inside the class I'm going to create a user defined function called display. So I've used my def keyword followed by the function name, that is display, and inside the display function I'll use self as my parameter, and then I'm going to say print self.id. I'll give a comma and I'm going to print my name. So I have written self.name. So I'll run this, and then we're going to create an object called s, and we'll call our class that is student, and I'll say s dot display. Now let's run it and see the result. You can see it here. We have called the class using this object called s, so it's displaying the ID that is 10 and the name that is Anderson. Cool. Now we are going to see an example where we'll pass a doc string. So in the slide we discussed that the first string inside the class is called a doc string and has a brief description of the class. So let me show you an example how to pass in a doc string. I'll create a class, again let's say called student, give a colon, and then we'll have our message, which is essentially a doc string. I'll say this is a student class. Then I'll create a variable called age. Let's say the student's age is 14, and then I'll create a user defined function called welcome and have my self parameter. After that I'll say print my message, let's say hi, comma, welcome to section, let's say B, and then I'll come out of the class and we are going to print class name, that is student. I'll say student.age, and then I'll say print, I'll just scroll down, student dot, then I'm going to use the function name that is welcome, and after that to print the docstring message I'm going to say my class name, that is student dot, I'm going to use underscore underscore doc underscore underscore. Now we have created a class called student that has a variable called age, so we are going to display the age of the student, and then we are going to display the doc string. So here we are not going to print the message which is present inside the function called welcome. Let's run it. You can see it here. We have the message printed. So first we are printing the age of the student, and then we have the docstring message, that is this is a student class. Alright, now let's move ahead. We are going to see how to use the init function in a class. So I'll say my comment init function. Alright, I'll scroll down. I'll create another class called student. This time we are going to use the init function. So I'm writing def space underscore underscore init underscore underscore. Then we'll have our self parameter. Let's say the next parameter is name, and then we have the date of birth of the student. I'll say self dot name equal to name. Then I'll say self dot dob or date of birth equal to my parameter, that is dob, and then I'll say my object, let's say s1. I'm going to call my class student, and it will have values of name and date of birth. Let's say the name of the student is Harry, and the date of birth, let's say it is 29th October 1992. Alright, and finally we are going to print s1.name, and then I'll say print s1.date of birth. Let's run it. You can see it here. We have the name and the date of birth of the student printed. Cool. Now you can also modify the objects that you have created. Suppose I want to change the name from Harry to Virat, because my object was s1.name Harry. I want to change this to Virat. Let me show you how to do it. This is very simple. I'll just give a comment, that is modify objects. The way to do is you just say the object name, that is s1, followed by the parameter that is name equal to, let's say, Virat. Now if I print s1 dot name, I'll have Virat instead of Harry. Okay. Now if you want to delete the object properties, let's say I want to delete one of the properties, let's say I want to delete name property of the student. To do that, I can use the del keyword followed by the object name, that is s1, and say s1 dot name. Now if I print s1 dot name, it will throw an error saying student object has no attribute name, because we are first deleting it and then we are trying to print it, and hence Python cannot recognize this attribute name. Now you can also delete objects, that is all the objects, using the del keyword. So this means we can delete both the objects that we created above, which is name and date of birth. So the way to do is I'll just say del s1. So it will delete all the objects, that is s1 in this case. I'll run this, and then let's say I want to print s1 dot date of birth. You see it here, Python says name s1 is not defined because we deleted it. Cool. Now coming to the final section of the demo, we're going to create a simple class with init method again. So this time my class name is, let's say, animal. Give a colon, and then I'll write my init method using the def keyword. I'll say self comma name, that is the name of the animal, as the parameter. I'll say self dot name equal to name, and then I'm going to create another function called def, which is essentially a welcome or a greet message, and that has a parameter that is self. I'm going to print the greet message or the greet